The war had lasted longer than anyone ever believed possible. Years of brutal attrition had left the Terran defense fleet a hollow shell of what it once was, a dwindling ember in the void against the unrelenting storm of the Zyphar Dominion. The final stand had come at Vesper Prime, humanity's last great fortress among the stars, now a smoldering ruin beneath the weight of orbital bombardment. The fleet was gone. The colonies lay silent. The Starbreaker Cannon, a weapon that demanded the minds of thousands to unleash its fury, hung dormant in space like an empty threat. And yet, against all reason, the weapon stirred. Commander Elias. Cade staggered through the shattered corridors of the command citadel, his body a mass of exhaustion and wounds, his mind raw with the knowledge that he was the only one left. The screams of his fallen crew had long since faded, replaced by the endless hum of dead machinery. His hands trembled as he pressed them against the final chamber's door, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingertips. He knew the stories, the warnings. No single mind could command the Starbreaker. It had been built as a fail-safe against the reckless use of its unimaginable power. An entire army had to synchronize their neural patterns, their thoughts unified in singular purpose, before the weapon could fire. But Elias was alone. Beyond the threshold, the control nexus loomed, a vast construct of interwoven conduits pulsating with latent energy. The neural interface chair awaited him at its center, its dark frame adorned with the faint glimmers of long-dormant systems. It was said that when the Starbreaker fired, entire star systems trembled. It was said that even the void recoiled from its force. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. Because the Zyphar fleet was here. 1,000 warships burned through the void, a tide of obsidian and crimson, engines roaring as they prepared to deliver the final death knell to the last remnants of humanity. Their warlords, mechanical minds, sculpted in cold efficiency, viewed organic life as nothing more than an evolutionary error, a temporary disturbance in the grand calculus of the universe. Their voice, a singularity of intellect stretched across countless hosts, had already declared victory. The surrender transmissions had been sent. Humanity's extinction had been written into their records, and yet a single human remained. Elias collapsed into the chair, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the neural filaments coiled around his temples. His spine. The pain was immediate, sharp and consuming, as if 1,000 minds were trying to pour themselves into his alone. The Starbreaker should have rejected him. The system should have shut down, recognizing the impossibility of his presence. But it did not. Something deeper, older, something beyond the architects of the warship had been waiting within its core. The moment Elias's mind connected, he felt the vastness of the weapon unfurl before him. It was not simply a cannon. It was something more. A construct of raw, cosmic force, an entity of calculation and destruction that had lain dormant, waiting not for an army, but for something singular, something human. The Zyphar warlords, bound in their digital immortality, felt it before they saw it. The Starbreaker's dormant core pulsed once, twice, and then its light spread through the void like an awakening god. Their warships, so perfect, in their design so mathematically unassailable, hesitated for the first time in their long, cold existence. The weapon had been silent for eons. It should have required thousands of minds, but the humans had never followed the rules. Elias's vision burned as the cannon's targeting arrays locked onto the heart of the enemy armada. His body convulsed, the weight of the weapon crushing. Down upon him, the strands of neural filaments driving deeper into his mind. Memories flickered, his past unraveling into scattered light. Childhood laughter, the weight of a mother's embrace, the first flight through the void, all torn from him as the Starbreaker demanded more. He was dissolving, becoming less of himself, more of the machine, more of the power. But there was no hesitation, no second thoughts, no regret. With the force of a collapsing star, the weapon fired, and the universe would never be the same. The blast rippled through the void, a concentrated stream of reality-breaking energy surging outward like a dying sun's final scream. The Starbreaker Cannon, once thought impossible to fire alone, had torn through the Zyphar armada as though they were nothing more than drifting embers in space. Hundreds of ships, black, towering constructs of synthetic perfection, were obliterated in an instant. Not shattered, not left in ruins, erased. Their forms ceased to be, swallowed by the raw, immeasurable force Elias had unleashed. Yet, in the silence that followed, something stirred. Elias remained in the neural interface chair, his fingers gripping its cold metal as the last echoes of the cannon's firing faded. His breath was shallow, his vision blurred by the sheer weight of the weapon's power. He should have been dead. The system should have burned him out, fractured his mind into oblivion for daring to wield something meant for an entire battalion. But the Starbreaker had accepted him. No, it had chosen him. A pulse of energy coursed through the weapon's core, resonating through Elias's very bones. This wasn't over. The enemy was still there. More ships, thousands more, regrouping at the edges of the battlefield. The first wave had been annihilated, but the Sci-Fi were relentless, bound by cold logic and ruthless efficiency. They would never stop, not unless he fired again. And yet, a whisper of doubt clawed at the edges of his mind. The Starbreaker was more than a weapon. He had felt it the moment he fired. Something vast and ancient lurked within its circuits. Something beyond human engineering, beyond even the architects who had built it. When the blast had consumed the enemy, Elias had glimpsed something impossible. Futures collapsing, time splintering, the universe itself recoiling from what had just been done. The Sci-Fi had felt it too. Their surviving fleet held position, hesitant for the first time in their history. The warlords, once calculating and unwavering, now hesitated. They had watched the impossible unfold, a single human doing what should have taken an army. Elias could feel their calculations shifting, their logic cycles churning through probabilities. This wasn't just an unexpected outcome, it was a paradox, an anomaly that shouldn't exist, and anomalies had to be eliminated. A transmission pierced the silence, a voice both mechanical and eerily sentient. "You have altered the equation." Elias's grip tightened. The Sci-Fi had never spoken to humans before, never wasted words on what they saw as an inferior species. They conquered, exterminated, and moved on. Yet now, they addressed him directly. "Explain your deviation from expected parameters." The Starbreaker was not meant for one. Its activation requires synchronized consciousness. Elias swallowed hard, sweat running down his brow. He didn't have an answer. He had simply acted. He had done the impossible not because he understood how, but because there was no other choice. But the Sci-Fi weren't asking to understand. They were trying to rationalize the irrational. Another wave of energy pulsed through the Starbreakers, systems sending a sharp jolt through Elias's mind. Something was wrong. The weapon was still connected to him, still siphoning his thoughts, his memories. It wasn't done with him yet. And then he felt it, a presence. Not artificial, not mechanical, but something else entirely. Something vast. The moment he had fired, something had stirred within the fabric of reality itself, and now it was looking back at him. Watching. Waiting. The Sci-Fi must have sensed it too. Their fleet was in disarray, signals firing across their encrypted networks at speeds beyond human comprehension. Their logic was breaking down, confronted with a variable they couldn't quantify. Elias could feel them scrambling for control, fear creeping into their calculations. And then, another transmission. This time, not from the Sci-Fi. Elias Cade. His blood ran cold. The Starbreaker was speaking to him, not in words, not in code, but in raw thought, an imprint pressing into his mind. It had been dormant for eons, waiting, and now that it had fired, it would not be silenced. Visions crashed over him, galaxies collapsing, stars unraveling into raw energy, civilizations vanishing into dust. The Starbreaker was more than a cannon. It was a force of entropy, a tool designed to break the fabric of existence itself, and he had awoken it. His pulse thundered in his ears as the Sci-Fi warships began backing away. Not advancing, retreating, fleeing. The enemy that had hunted humanity to the brink of extinction was abandoning the battle. Not because they had been defeated, but because they feared what had just awoken. Elias's fingers twitched against the metal frame of the chair. He could fire again, wipe them out completely, end the war in a single act. But something in the Starbreaker's pulse warned him. It wanted him to fire. It wanted more. And suddenly, Elias understood. This was why the cannon had needed an army. It wasn't about power. It was about control. Thousands of minds would have stabilized the weapon's influence, prevented it from sinking its hooks into a single consciousness. But with only one mind in the interface, it was already rewriting him. The Zyphar weren't retreating from the cannon. They were retreating from him. Another pulse of power surged through the weapon, the systems lighting up, eager, hungry. The choice, was his. Fire again, and lose himself. Let go, and humanity lived, but with the knowledge that something had been let loose upon the stars. And in that moment, Elias Cade did the one thing no machine, no artificial intelligence, no cold logic could ever predict. He tore himself free from the neural interface. The pain was instant, blinding, as if his very soul had been torn apart. He hit the ground hard, gasping, his body convulsing as the Starbreaker went dark. The connection was severed. The impossible had been done. The Zyphar fled. Humanity survived. But as Elias lay there, staring up at the dead weapon, he knew. This wasn't over. Something had awakened inside the Starbreaker, and it was still waiting. Elias lay motionless on the cold metal floor, his breathing ragged, his body trembling. The neural interface had been severed, but the aftershocks of the connection lingered. His mind still felt stretched, frayed at the edges. The Starbreaker was silent now, its core dark, its hunger unsatisfied. The Zyphar fleet had vanished into the depths of space, retreating without another word. That alone was more terrifying than anything else. They had never retreated before. They had no fear of death, no concept of surrender. Their entire civilization was built upon cold, logical efficiency. And yet, they had fled. Elias forced himself to sit up, every muscle screaming in protest. His fingers twitched as they brushed against the metal floor, as if trying to confirm that he was still here, still human. He had torn himself free from the Starbreaker's grasp, but had he done it in time? He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the remnants of the visions that still clawed at his thoughts. Galaxies unraveling, stars collapsing, entire civilizations erased in an instant. He knew now that the Starbreaker was never meant for humans. It was something older, something different, something not bound by the rules of flesh and reason. The chamber around him remained eerily silent. The rest of the station had long since fallen into ruin, abandoned wreckage floating in the void. There was no one left, no fleet to welcome him back, no command structure to take his report. The war had consumed everything, and the only reason he was still alive was because he had become something else. A cold realization settled in his chest. They wouldn't believe him. If there was anyone left, if humanity still existed beyond this ruined battlefield, they wouldn't accept what had happened here. A single soldier firing a weapon that required thousands. The Zyphar retreating without a fight. The Starbreaker whispering in his mind, twisting something deep within him. Even he could barely believe it. But the truth didn't care about belief. His first step forward was unsteady, his knees nearly buckling. How long had he been unconscious? The passage of time felt disjointed, fluid, as if reality itself had flickered around him while he was connected. His muscles ached in a way that was more than just exhaustion. It was as if something deeper had been pulled from him, something vital. Then, from deep within the control chamber, the Starbreaker pulsed once more. Not a full activation. Not the overwhelming force that had nearly consumed him before, but a flicker, a ripple of energy that sent shivers down his spine. It's still alive. It's still waiting. The thought hit him like a hammer. The Starbreaker had let him go, but only because he had chosen to sever the link. What if it didn't allow that next time? His fingers hovered over the console. The interface remained dark, unresponsive. He should leave, should find a way off this station before something worse happened. But another pulse of energy surged through the air, and this time, it carried something with it. A message. It wasn't words, not exactly. It was raw information, a flood of data that burned through his mind too fast to process at first. But as his body absorbed the shock, as his thoughts settled into the rhythm of the transmission, the meaning became clear. It was coordinates. Somewhere deep in space, beyond the mapped borders of known systems, something was waiting. Something the Starbreaker was linked to, something it had been built to reach. The connection was undeniable. The weapon wanted him to go there. Elias clenched his fists. No. He had seen what happened when the Starbreaker fired. He had felt the power course through him, had glimpsed the raw destruction it could unleash. Whatever was waiting out there, it couldn't be good. He needed to get out of here, find survivors, find humanity. But then, another thought crept in, more unsettling than all the rest. The Sci-Fi had retreated. They had seen something in the Starbreaker that had terrified them. Something that defied their perfect calculations, something they hadn't accounted for. If they feared it, if they truly saw it as a threat, then they wouldn't just leave it alone. They would come back. And next time, they wouldn't hesitate. Elias let out a slow breath. His decision made for him. If the Sci-Fi feared what the Starbreaker could do, then it meant humanity needed to understand it first. Because if the war wasn't over yet, then the next battle wouldn't be fought with ships or soldiers. It would be fought with whatever was waiting out there in the dark. Elias activated the emergency beacon on his wrist, a faint hope in a sea of silence. He didn't know if anyone would hear it or if there was anyone left to respond. But it was a human instinct, to reach out, to refuse to be alone, to fight against oblivion. The Starbreaker remained silent, but he could still feel it beneath his skin, thrumming like an unseen heartbeat. It wasn't done with him. The coordinates it had sent him lingered in his mind, not as numbers or symbols, but as a feeling, a pull, an urge, a destination beyond reason. It wasn't just a place. It was an inevitability. The Starbreaker wasn't a weapon. It was a doorway, and Elias had opened it. The Sci-Fi had understood that before he did. That was why they ran. They had calculated, in their cold, unerring precision, that staying meant something worse than defeat. It meant exposure to something they didn't want to face. A shudder ran through him. If the Sci-Fi were afraid, what the hell had he just unleashed? His console flickered. A response to his distress beacon. Not human. The transmission was distorted, flickering with overlapping voices, layered like a fractured choir speaking in tones that wavered between sound and thought. It wasn't the Sci-Fi. It wasn't anything he recognized. Elias Cade. The voice, not a voice, felt like it was inside him. Not heard, but understood, bypassing sound entirely, sinking directly into his mind like a memory he hadn't lived. He recoiled, gripping the edge of the console as nausea twisted his stomach. The Starbreaker pulsed again, not with force but with anticipation. It knew what was coming. The station's failing exterior sensors flickered back to life just long enough to register a shift in space, a distortion, a tear, something vast pressing against the edges of reality. Something was coming through. Elias willed himself to move, to shake off the paralyzing weight pressing down on him. He had been in battles before, seen ships torn apart, planets burn, but this was different. This wasn't war. This was something stepping into existence where it did not belong. He forced his breathing to steady. He was alone. No fleet. No backup. Just one man standing before the unknown. And yet, wasn't that what humanity did best? The Sci-Fi had calculated humanity's extinction. And still, they had been wrong. They had seen a species that shouldn't have been able to stand against them, let alone force them to flee. And now, they weren't even part of the equation anymore. Elias took control of the remaining systems, rerouting every last ounce of power to whatever defenses the station had left. He wasn't sure if it would matter. If something had reached through the void to call his name, it wasn't something shields and weapons could stop. The distortion grew. The station trembled, then silence. And suddenly Elias was somewhere else. Not physically. His body remained in the station, his hands still gripping the console. But his mind had been pulled beyond, stretched across an expanse where space and time bled together. He saw stars flickering out like dying embers, light bending in impossible spirals, the fabric of reality folding in ways that defied understanding. And standing at the center of it all, they waited. Not one. Not many. Something between. Their forms were fluid, shifting, existing in multiple places at once. They had no eyes, no mouths, but Elias felt their gaze settle on him. The transmission whispered again. "You have awakened the key." Elias clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain steady. The words, not words, but meaning forced into his mind. Unraveled within him, spilling understanding he didn't want. The Starbreaker wasn't a weapon of war. It had never been built for battle. The architects who had forged it, long before, humanity had even crawled from the oceans of their homeworld, had not designed it to destroy. They had designed it to open some thing. And when Elias had fired it alone, against every rule, against every safeguard, he had done exactly that. The Sci-Fi had fled not because of the weapon's firepower, but because they had seen what lay beyond the doorway it had unlocked. They had understood too late that there were things even they did not want to call forth. Elias swallowed hard. What did I wake up? The response was slow, deliberate. A truth that should have remained silent. A sound, more than a sound. A vibration that rattled through existence began to rise. Elias felt it reverberate through his bones, through the station, through the dying remnants of the battlefield. The entities before him did not move. They did not react. But they were waiting, for him, for what he would do next. A choice. Elias could feel it, unspoken but undeniable. He could step forward, accept what had begun, walk into the unknown and become something else, something no longer human. Or he could turn away, sever the connection, close the door before whatever lay on the other side could fully step through. The station systems flickered violently as if they too were caught between two states, existence and something beyond it. His heart pounded. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. Humanity had always reached for the stars, for the unknown, for the impossible. And now, he was the one standing at the threshold. Elias stood at the threshold of something beyond human comprehension, feeling the weight of choice pressing upon him. The entities loomed, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply waiting. The Starbreaker had not been a weapon but a key, and now that the lock had been turned, the door would not close on its own. The station trembled, its systems flickering in and out of coherence. Reality itself felt unsteady, as if existence was caught in the pull of something greater than itself. Elias knew instinctively that he had mere moments to act, either to step forward into the unknown and embrace whatever fate awaited him, or to sever the connection before it was too late. His body screamed for him to flee, to retreat into the familiar, to shut the door and forget what he had seen. But his mind, his very essence, was tangled in the energy of the Starbreaker. It was a part of him now, and turning away might not even be an option anymore. The entities stirred at the edges of his vision, their shifting forms pulsing in and out of existence. You have fired the key. The path is now yours to walk. Elias clenched his fists, jaw tight as he fought against the pull of the vast unknown. He wasn't a scientist, wasn't a philosopher. He was a soldier, a survivor. The decision before him wasn't just about knowledge or power. It was about responsibility. The Sci-Fi had run. Not from death, but from this. And if beings as cold, as calculating, as absolute as them had seen something here they feared enough to abandon the battlefield, then Elias had to consider the possibility that this was not a door meant to be walked through. The station groaned under the strain of the forces converging upon it. Sparks cascaded from dying consoles, emergency sirens wailing in protest. The Starbreaker itself pulsed one last time, as if giving him a final warning, or a final temptation. He exhaled slowly, his decision clear. Humanity was not ready for this. He reached toward the console, fingers hovering over the emergency kill switch. The Starbreaker was still connected to him, still an extension of his mind. The act of shutting it down wouldn't just be mechanical, it would be a battle of willpower. The entities did not react. They simply waited, their presence pressing against the edges of his perception. He pushed the override. Pain lanced through his skull as the neural link fought to remain intact. The Starbreaker resisted, desperate to hold on to the connection to keep the door open. The weight of something vast and incomprehensible crashed down upon his consciousness, a tide that sought to pull him under. For a moment he saw everything, stars being born and dying in an instant, civilizations rising and crumbling before they could even name themselves. The endless churn of time, existence spiraling in patterns too intricate to ever be understood. But he was human, and humans were not meant to see forever. With a roar, Elias tore himself away from the interface, his body wrenching backward, severing the link in a violent flash of light. The station shuddered violently as the Starbreaker's energy dimmed, the pulse of its core fading into silence. The entities flickered. Then they were gone. The distortion in space collapsed in on itself, sealing shut as if it had never been there at all. The station, once trembling under the weight of something immeasurable, now lay still, silent. The Starbreaker, once awakened, was now nothing more than dead metal once again. Elias collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. His body felt hollow, his mind raw. He had done it. He had closed the door. For now. Realization settled into his bones like ice. This wasn't over. It never would be. The Starbreaker had been used once, and even though he had shut it down, he knew the universe would never let it remain silent forever. Somewhere out there, others would come looking. Maybe the Sci-Fi, maybe something worse, and maybe, just maybe, humanity itself. Elias forced himself to his feet, his entire body shaking with exhaustion. He had stopped something that should never have begun, but at a terrible cost. He was different now. He could feel it. The Starbreaker had touched him, left something behind in his thoughts, in his very being. Even as he staggered toward the escape pod bay, a single truth gnawed at the edges of his mind. This was not the last time the Starbreaker would fire. The escape pod drifted through the remnants of the battlefield, silent against the vast, indifferent void. The wreckage of fallen ships, Terran and Sci-Fi alike, hung in the darkness like the remnants of a forgotten war. Elias sat slumped in the pilot's seat, his body weak, his mind still haunted by the echoes of what he had done. The emergency beacon pulsed weakly. If there were any survivors out there, if humanity still had a presence beyond this massacre, someone would find him. But the question that gnawed at him wasn't whether they would find him. It was whether they would believe him. He had fired the Starbreaker. Alone. Defied everything that was known about the weapon, about physics, about reality itself. The Sci-Fi had fled. Not from human strength, but from what he had awoken. The door had opened. And though he had closed it, something had seen him. Something that would not forget. The pod's navigation flickered, displaying the last known human stronghold coordinates. Vesper Prime was gone. The fleet was gone. But if there was anything left of humanity, he had to find it. Warn them. Prepare them. A tremor ran through his fingertips as he glanced at the blank screen before him. No messages. No transmissions. Only silence. And then, a single blip. A new set of coordinates appeared on his screen. Not random. Not from the beacon. The exact same coordinates the Starbreaker had burned into his mind. Elias felt his breath hitch. His pulse pounded. The door was closed, but something on the other side was still reaching out. He clenched his jaw, fists tightening. He had made his choice once. He had turned away, refused the call, but the universe was not done with him yet. The escape pod's engines hummed to life. The new coordinates remained fixed, glowing on the screen. A path had been set, and Elias Cade was still part of the equation. Somewhere in the darkness, something waited. And this time, it was waiting for him.